Um, and I just wanted to run through a couple of club items real quick before we throw it over to our um, presenters. And a couple things. There was the Holidaily Homebrew competition, and your beers were due in on the 21st. So if you didn't do that, then too bad, so sad. I know I sent beers. This guy right there sent beers. Anyone else? That
I sent some in, but
Cam and
mine are
Brian.
lost in
Kim.
the mail somewhere.
Right on. So we had, but that, wow, that's pretty good. So I was worried that there would be a lack of participation. So I honestly have no idea when the actual flyer doesn't say anything about when they're actually going to judge the beers. Does Sue, do you know anything about that or? No?
Yeah, I don't know what I think. Well, they have their sort of pre-convention day on online. So last year, I don't know if you remember, they did it. They had a bunch of gluten-free breweries come out to Boulder, or sorry, to Golden, and I think they did the same online this year. So I'm not sure where I imagine that the tasting or the contest bit is probably either coming up or has happened. Not sure though.
And they were doing that as a part of the Great American Beer Festival, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Is
And I didn't even know if that was
well.
going on this year.
Yeah, I think that's virtual.
Okay, so I guess we'll just have to get in touch with Caitlin and try to see when that's happening, or maybe I'll watch this video and be like, "Yeah, we're doing it this day." What else? Oh, I was just going to go over some. I thought it was kind of cool going through the club statistics that the admins can look at on the Facebook page, which is pretty cool. So right now we have just over 1,100 members. We're 47% increase since the start of the year, which is a lot.
Nice.
Top 4 countries also say that because the other ones, not that they don't matter, right? Everybody matters. But the top 4 countries, the USA, Australia, Canada, and the UK. And then there's members from all throughout the whole world. Pretty impressive. Sometimes we get some interesting posts and from all over the world, right? So it's fantastic. Other than that, I didn't have any other specific club items. So I wanted to introduce our guests. So Aaron Gervais, who's been on the meetings before one other time, is head brewer, co-owner, Otherwise Brewing, and Mark Stevens, who's not been on before, is a senior research associate at Novozymes and also head of brewing at Tarbanks Brewery. I hope I got this right. In
Lewisburg, North Carolina.
Lewis. I was gonna say Lewisburg or Louisburg, right? Yeah. Lewisburg. And so thank you guys for joining. If you guys want to add any extra, information about yourselves, that'd be great. Maybe Aaron, if you wanted to expound about the status of Otherwise Brewing, and Mark, tell us anything about your operation or your experience with Novozymes, that'd be great as well.
Okay.
Sure. Well, I can just say quickly for us that we were planning to launch in May, which some of you may have heard before, but of course then the pandemic happened, and our original launch plan was based mostly on selling to bars. So that's kind of dead in the water right now. So we had to apply for different types of permits so we could sell direct to consumers. So we're almost through that process. So we are, the launch is imminent. We will hopefully have beer in the hands of anyone in California before the end of the year.
Cool. And Mark, tell us about how you got involved with Novozymes and your brewery. Just give us a little synopsis, if you will.
All right. Yeah, I've been with Novozymes since 2008. So I've been there, and then it's only been three. Well, this would be our 4th year. No, I'm sorry, 3 years. 2017, I opened up Tarbanks, and it was kind of like a dream. And I had a friend that he was interested in opening a brewery up, so we went in, and we pretty much was a bar to start with, trying to get permits. So Aaron, I feel you on the permits. Yeah. So, and it took us about a year or so before we got all the brewing permits finalized and got up and brewing. So we're still not at full capacity. So, but and that's pretty much it.
And Mark did reveal to us in a pre-meeting that he may, in the near future, actually brew a gluten-free beer, right?
Yes. I'm really interested because, yeah. So I'll let y'all know that I'm no expert in gluten-free brewing, and but it has come a long ways, I guess, with the use of enzymes and everything from the word on the street, and I'm really interested in trying some of these unique beers here. I see gluten-free beer Brian's online, and he has sent me plenty of pictures, and they look phenomenal, the beers there, and but yes, I'm very interested in brewing some, and I hear you guys have got a really good wiki on this too. So
That's all because of Stuart, for the most part.
oh,
So Stuart is the wiki creator, and
okay.
Yeah, I'm on a Zoom meeting.
Okay.
so we're it's kind of a work in progress, but it's fantastic right now for a good resource for
Okay.
the club. So yeah,
Okay.
definitely.
All right.
Cool. Thanks for that. So before we get started on and I don't Aaron and Mark, did you guys have a couple slides you're gonna share? Okay,
We
cool.
do, yeah.
Yes.
So before we get started on the whole enzyme discussion, I just wanted to briefly talk about uh, there's a tendency for people to get scared off that are starting brewing gluten-free beer specifically and all grain brewing, and that's mainly due to the complexities of what we're going to talk about in a little bit, right? So just before we get too in depth into this, and this is for everyone in this meeting and for whoever watches it on YouTube, the most important thing to take away is that you can make good beer um, even if you don't get your enzymes exactly perfect in your temperature steps or exactly hit or spot on, um, you, you know, you're still going to make beer, right? So that's the most important thing to take away, right? So don't get overwhelmed by, hey, I missed my temperature by 1 degree either side of it. It's probably not going to make that big of a difference, right? There's ways to make, beer. There's ways to make good, better, and really good beers using these enzymes. But don't get overwhelmed and frustrated and not brew at all, right? So, anyways, that's my diatribe on that. So I'll throw it over to you guys, and we can take it from there.
Okay. Sounds good. I'll start off here and go into. I'll share my screen here and get the slides pulled up. But yes, good talk there because it can be overwhelming, but it's nothing to be too concerned about when it's coming to brewing. Let me know if you can see my screen. Is it? Can y'all see that there?
No.
Nope, not yet.
Not yet.
Let me go back over and check. Oh, okay. This is I've only used Zoom a few times. We use Microsoft Teams mostly, so I apologize about that. Let me know.
Good. Yeah, it's up.
Okay, great.
Cool.
Thank you. Okay, cool. So yes, like Kel was saying there, don't be discouraged by enzymes because brewing beer is pretty much a chemistry project in itself. Whether you're all grain brewing or you're extract brewing, the whole step is chemistry. And I'm not going to go into too many deep details on this right here because it can be confusing and everything. So, but Aaron, he has done some really nice work, and I think his side job. He is a scientist. But he's got some really good articles on his blog and everything about some of the work that he's done, and he's going to go into some of that, I think, at the end of here. So I'll get on with this here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to touch base on the enzyme basics, what they are, where they came from. This is keep it very general. Talk a little bit about malt enzymes, and as you know, I'm not familiar with gluten-free brewing, but all seeds are kind of somewhat similar. So they'll when you do malt these things here, a lot of them do have enzymes in them. But I'll touch base on that. Talk a little bit about step mashing, gelatinization, the two big enzyme products here that has been really great to gluten-free brewers from what I've been hearing. And I'll give a little bit of functionality examples to kind of give a little critical thinking on how these enzymes are working. So started off, what are enzymes? Enzymes are proteins. They are biological molecules. They are found in our bodies. They're found in all living organisms. They do carry out daily functions throughout them. One enzyme in particular is salivary amylase that you can find in your saliva. And technically, if you start to eat bread or something, the more you chew it, it breaks it down and it can become sweeter as you chew it. They're found in yeast, and they carry out a lot of functions in the brewing process, as well as malt. So, and I say malt here because basically this is on the, for me, I'm traditional brewer, so I use mostly malt. And enzymes can be found in a lot of these other cereal grains as well. So how does enzymes work? They basically, they lower the activation energy for a chemical reaction. And I try to explain it as picture a tractor trailer trying to get up a hill, and he's fully loaded. And basically what an enzyme would do is come in there and cut that hill in half, and it makes it easier for that truck to kind of cross that hill. And so basically in brewing here, as an example, let's say this blue rectangle here is a maltose, for instance, and this right here is an enzyme, this little Pac-Man kind of drawing. And so what it does is it's very specific. So if everything is lined right, this enzyme is going to come in and it's going to grab that maltose and it's going to fit like a locking key, and it's going to cut that maltose into 2 glucose units here. And so enzymes they would typically work regardless. I mean, a chemical reaction can work without enzymes. It just takes a long time. So especially from my understanding, gluten-free brewing, the mashing takes forever. You have to serial cook and cool down. It's a long process. So these enzymes work wonders, so you can eliminate some of this going into it to make the day much easier. All right, talk a little bit about malt enzymes. So these are typical enzymes that are found in the kernel of malt. And these also can be found in millet, buckwheat, some of these other gluten-free grains. And so as it's during the malting process, these grains they're starting to take root and to a seedling. And depending on the degree of malt, the malting that they do there, or germination, they'll become fully modified or well modified, they'll call them. And basically what it's doing is breaking down that cell wall. I'm not 100% sure on gluten-free grains here, but I know several of them are malted that I've seen, but they do have lower amylases in it, or lower enzyme content from my understanding. And maybe Aaron can talk a little bit about that. But basically, the well modified malt is typically, it goes in there and tells you this cell wall is broken down enough to where you don't have to do step mashing. Well, I'll get into that in a minute here about step mashing. But basically, these are the enzymes here that are crucial for brewing beer. Of these different enzymes, they also have their optimal temperature, the optimal pH range as well. So you can look at this beta glucanase, for instance. This is a cellulase that helps break down cell wall. The pH of it is pretty much just below what a typical beer would, what a typical beer would be, and what the optimal temperature of a standard beer would be at, and the temperature range here for that. if you look through some of these other ones here, you have a beta amylase here at the pH optimals here, the alpha amylase, xylanase. These are all critical enzymes to be able to liberate these sugars that you need to ferment to make beer. And although that their temperature ranges vary, they somewhat overlap pH ranges, and this being their optimal, so that overlap means that they may be able to perform at a higher temperature than what their optimal is, but not as well as if it was in their optimal. And with these, like Ondea Pro, the enzyme blends that it is, a lot of these overlap. So you kind of have to go in and optimize your brew recipe for this here. And this is kind of leads into step mashing and why step mashing is critical. I know traditional brewers, a lot of them now come in and they do single infusion mash, where they actually take and they have a higher temp strike water that they add into the mash. It counterbalances the temperature of the malt to drop that temperature down to the ideal temperature range that they want to target. Usually it's around 152 to 156 Fahrenheit. And that is the range of the alpha amylase, which they're going to liberate a lot of these sugars. A lot of them have went to this just because a lot of your malts that you get tend to be well modified. However, now we have so many maltsters that are local, and people tend to try to brew more local beers from local grown products. And the malting process there may not be as efficient. So you can lose some of this activity or some of this modification to the cell wall through the malting process. So that's where these enzymes can come in and play a role. So like the beta glucanase here, if you can come in and you mash at a lower temp and you kind of go into the protein rest and work all the way through your beta and then your amylase rest, these are going to help with each of these activities, and all of them work together, and the synergies that they all combine or work together with, they get you a higher quality beer, I should say. It really helps out brewing. So with these are some of the gluten-free grains that I pulled up here that are, and they're ideal or gelatinization temps. And this is when the starch swells. It gets the water in there to help to be able to get these enzymes in to liberate these sugars that you need for the brewing process. But I will say that before enzymes like the Ondea Pro, the Ceramix Flex, you have to have a cereal cooker pretty much. So you do have to raise these temperatures up to this degree here in order to get the starch to swell. Then you have to cool it back down to below, because most of your esterification temperatures are much lower than this here. So that's where we come with Ondea Pro. And Ondea Pro is a enzyme blend. It was actually created for unmalted barley use. And also they use it for different raw materials, such as a gluten-free brewer. But I know in some third world countries, they don't have malt that they can source there, and they have various grains that they can get, these cereal grains. And this product here works really good with it because you have your cellulase, xylanase, these other activities here, your protease, lipase. These all have their own function. And again, with the optimal temperature and the pH range of it, which all these overlap. So it's good to kind of target what you would see the benefit of that actual mash. So like for instance here, the cellulase and the xylanase here, this right here helps to increase yield by this. If the malt or the grain isn't modified good enough, or there's still some degree of modification that can take place, these are the products here that will help break down that cell wall to non-viscous polysaccharides and other long-chain polysaccharides, your beta-glucans and arabinoxylans. And then it helps with the sparging of a mash as well. They also, the protease and the lipase, they work well for foam stability, the body of the beer. All of them play a role, of course, in for high gravity brewing. So if you want to brew a higher gravity beer, then definitely the cellulases play a big part of that to help break down that cell wall and to liberate more starches there. The pilulinase is in there. It helps out with attenuation control. It works really good. So if you run a beta amylase rest, the pilulinase works really good when that beta amylase is run there, because it can help with attenuation. And that's one enzyme I will say is the beta amylase that I tell people, try to do a beta amylase rest because it can improve your attenuation. And I'm not sure on gluten-free brewing. I have read that I think millet and buckwheat, they typically have beta amylase activity, and some of the other ones, but I've got a lot of learning to learn, a lot of learning to do on those particular feedstocks there. Now the Ceramix Flex has, we've recently, with this project we're currently working on, we've brought this product from Europe here to the States for this project. And it was created to eliminate cereal cooking, as well as help some of these other adjuncts that you can add into it that like these cassava, I guess, and what are some of these third world grains that you can't get, like malt or rice or corn or something like that. So this really helps to break that down without the need of a high temperature steeping or cooking to swell that starch up. It's flexibility in that fact. So you can use a multitude of adjuncts in it. I know with traditional brewing, we use a lot of wheat and oats, and the darker that grain has been malted, the less activity that you would find any enzyme is present there. So to kind of give you an idea of how some of these activities work here, I don't want to confuse anyone here, but I just wanted to give an example here. So your amylases, your proteases, everything there, the specific affinity that they have for these different molecules in there. So for instance, let's look at amylose here, or amylopectin. These are wide chains, and they're like everywhere. So you have like pilulinase is going to be in here. You have a maltogenic amylase, and they all work together in cleaving these different chains up at different segments. So some of them may cleave to the inside of the chain. Some of them may cleave on the outside of the chain. And so they're going to liberate more starch, more sugar components is going to be added in that mash. So that's why it's critical to do a step mash. Then depending on and it's going to vary depending on your certain grains that's in there. But basically, if you go through a protease rest, then it's going to cleave up more amino acids that's in there. It's going to create more FAN, the nitrogen for downstream of fermentation. And also, if you hit the beta rest, then that's going to definitely help attenuation out as well. And but I just wanted to show this here on how these enzymes are reacting to these different chains. And so if you skip temperature, you may not get as much sugar, but again, it's still not a bad thing, because you still, if you do a longer temp on another rest, it could liberate more sugars and some of these processes. So it kind of goes back to that slide previous or earlier that enzymes or the chemical process will work. The enzymes just make it work faster. So if you do miss something here, there could be some residual activity that's much slower, and it could still liberate sugars there that you need for this particular beer. And so with beta glucan here, this is basically the cell wall here, your glucans, and you can see how these enzymes will come in and they'll cleave off to make smaller starch molecules, and kind of goes through where the specific cut spots are on these chains here. And for optimizing these here, there is really no definitive pH or temperature that I can recommend to say, all right, this is the best temperature range to do it, because I always recommend to do a step mash. And doing a step mash, you kind of got to look at you can look at your different grains and see, but basically it's the enzymes that are in these here, and they do vary. And basically, if you can keep it in that optimal range to do a step mash, the temperature would be much easier than the actual pH, because there's different styles of beer that create different flavors, and the pH is the one of the big contributor factors to that. So me personally, I typically I'll brew my beer roughly around 5.2, 5.1, and I try to maintain that pH, just because especially for me, because I'm a traditional brewer, but I use a lot of adjuncts in there, such as wheat and oats, and they create a really sticky, really viscous mash. And for the Xylan that's in the Ondea Pro, for instance, that pH optimal is about pH 5 to 5.2. A little over 5.2, it tends to lose its activity. It doesn't fall off, but so I typically try to stick with a pH 5.2. Some beers you may want to have a higher pH and then come back in and lower this down. But this is some of the stuff that I'm investigating on the gluten-free grains to get more inside information around these right here, to kind of to see where what I can learn, and maybe I can learn from you guys on this here as well. So, but definitely when you go to brew gluten-free, highly recommend take notes, and most importantly, you got to enjoy your beer while you're doing it. So that's what I have here. I just wanted to do like a general overview. Please, if anyone has any questions, you can ask me there. So
now's a good, yeah, definitely. Thank you, Mark. So I think now's definitely a good time for any questions. I know that I had a couple, so I'll just jump in there. So you had shown that the step mashing, the rising step mash, and it would last like 2.5 hours. Is that something that you recommend even for like a barley brewer to get the most fermentability out of their wort if they're using Ondea or Ceramax Flex? Is that something that you recommend, all of those different steps, regardless of grains?
Yeah, that's a good question. Me personally, I don't recommend it. I think it's a little overkill for especially for malt brewing. However, I think that for some of these gluten-free grains, it could be necessary to do so. And but I think that it's kind of like an optimization that you would have to kind of see there. Me personally, I definitely recommend a protease rest. You can do a longer protease rest and a beta amylase rest. Those are two big points that I try to express on, because they play such a huge factor for attenuation and a healthy fermentation.
And you had said, and I had another, my last question for you is in regards to I think you had mentioned the pilolinase rest, or is most effective at the beta amylase rest. Is that correct?
Yeah, so actually the pilolinase activity, well, the temperatures is a little bit higher than the beta amylase, but doing a beta amylase rest, you're creating more of the you're helping break down those starches a little bit smaller, so that pilulinase can come in and work more efficiently. So when you do a beta amylase, the pilulinase does work a lot better.
Thank you.
If that makes sense there. So,
yes. Yes.
right.
I got a couple questions. Talk about fungal alpha amylase, and I guess that's maltogenic, which is, in other words, it likes to make maltose, right? So is that a feature of all fungal alpha amylases?
That is a good question, and I'm really no expert in the fungal amylase side, but I know that a lot of people are wanting to get some of these fungal amylases because they do act more like a beta amylase.
Yeah.
And I know for certain styles of beer, they tend to work a lot better, especially if you're doing like German style beers and all, from what I'm learning. But I don't have a definitive answer to that.
Okay.
But I can reach back out to you and let you know what I find out about it. See.
Sure. I guess I know, and maybe in that list, or I guess if we think about the different enzymes we've got access to, I suppose some are fungal alpha amylase and some are bacterial, and they have different outcomes, and I guess different temperatures that they work at too. So I guess maybe that's another question I have on the Ondia. I think Aaron, you were saying that maybe there's a higher temperature or more, what's the word, thermophilic, or okay to be hot alpha amylase.
Yeah, I'll talk to that a little bit when I do my
perfect.
slides. Just to answer quickly what I remember off the top of my head from researching these amylases, and I mean there's thousands of them out there in nature. Like every species has its own type of amylase, so they're all going to be a little bit different. But I believe, and Mark, I could be totally wrong here, so if you know otherwise, please correct me. I believe that some of the ones that are used commercially to make maltose either come from a mold that infects onions, or from the mold that they use to make sake from rice.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure on that. I know we get a lot of our products from mold and fungi, but that makes sense though, especially for the sake making. But yes, I know one thing too. I should have added in with the presentation there. Like you were saying there, Stuart, these enzymes are much more thermostable than what is in the actual malt itself or the grain itself. Whereas some of them, they have a more broad temperature range that they can handle versus what is native to the cereal grain.
And if no one else has any other questions, maybe I'll just cast one more out there, and you may or may not be able to tell us on the Ceramix Flex. So I guess my understanding generally of that is that it allows us to get some of the starch extraction from these grains without some of the higher gelatinization temperatures that they would otherwise demand. I'm just curious about how does that work? What's the pathway that's going on there that would allow that to happen? Is it ripping open those starches somehow, or is it the cellulose activity or cellulase activity that's breaking down those cell walls?
Yeah, so it's mostly for the Ceramix, it's the maltogenic amylase. They'll come in, and again, this is a specificity that they have to these certain starch molecules, and all of them work in sync together with the pilulinase as well with the amylase. So amylases tend to work to the inside of a molecule, of a starch molecule, whereas the beta amylases work on the exterior side of it, sometimes non-reducing ends. Maltogenic amylase, this is the critical one, I believe, that's in Ceramix Flex, where it comes in and every second alpha 1,4 linkage there is cleaving. So during the gelatinization process, basically it's just these high temps where these bonds are swelling with the water and the starch is swelling there, and it allows those bonds to kind of break and into shorter chains, whereas then you cool back down and these alphas and betas, they tend to cleave that up even more to more of a fermentable sugar. And basically the Ceramix Flex, along with, because it has three different activities, it has the alpha amylase, the maltogenic, and the pilulinase. With all of those, they're able to get in there and cleave that starch up without having to go through the gelatinization into shorter chains.
And one thing I should add there on the Ceramix Flex that that's been critical for me in using it is that, and I'll talk about this in more detail later when I do my slides, but you do still need to gelatinize your starch when you're using Ceramix Flex. It's not like it just works on dry starch with no problems. So I have done tests trying to use it at a lower temperature on malted rice and see if it does anything, and it doesn't do a whole lot. It's kind of the same as you would get for using another type of enzyme at a lower temperature. So you do still need to raise the temperature, but what's great about it is that it survives up into those high temperatures where rice gelatinizes. So a traditional beta amylase or even alpha amylases that are present in grains, those get cooked out before you have gelatinized your rice. So that's one of the big challenges of brewing with rice. But with this Ceramix Flex, you've got this maltogenic amylase that works at those temperatures. So as that starch is being gelatinized, you can turn it into sugar still.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Aaron.
Hey, Iron Man, I bet you don't have this skin.
Any more questions or?
Just that we were talking about gelatinization. I have this thought, and I'm not sure if it's correct, but I'm thinking that gelatinization can it be that heat is not only the only factor that helps, but only time. So maybe if the grain is mashed for a longer period of time but at lower temperature, do you think obtaining the same result in terms of gelatinization would be possible?
I think so, but the question is, would it be a time frame that is realistic for brewing?
Right.
If you're going to leave
overnight
this
mash, right? Something like that. Overnight.
Yeah. For example, I was wondering with overnight mashing if that would.
If it was like a whole 7-day mash, then it probably wouldn't make sense. If it was overnight, then probably.
Yeah.
100 days.
One thing I'll add about long mashing, it's from my understanding, going into things, you want to try to do the mash as quick as possible, but you still want to liberate the sugars that you need for that and your other products there that's necessary for fermentation. And if you're doing it for a day or so of mashing, you can get unwanted, I guess, tannins and other products that's in the different grains there that can leach out because you have other chemistries that's taking place as well, rather than the gelatinization that can lead to potential off flavors of the beer.
Right. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. All right. I'll hand it over to you, Aaron. Let me clear out of here. Let me see if I can clear out of here. Oh, there we go.
All right. So I will jump in here, and I'm going to try to keep my. I only have 2 slides. I didn't want to make this go on for too long, but I wanted to focus on some of the more practical applications and stuff that I've discovered in brewing with these particular enzymes and gluten-free beer. So let's jump into it. Let's see. Can you all see my screen now? Okay, I got these two charts here, one for Ondia Pro and one for Ceramix Flex. Now I tend, when I'm explaining these things, I tend to shy away from talking too much about the specific enzymes because it can get technical really fast, and sometimes that leads people to to draw the raw conclusions here. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, when we're using gluten-free grains and we're using these enzymes, what we can expect at the different temperature steps. So this chart, you probably want to read it from the bottom up. So on the bottom left with Ondea Pro, you see at the bottom range, you get these protein enzymes. That's where they're most active. They'll still work a little bit higher, but they do denature and stop working entirely once you get up towards the top of the orange range, and they're really most happy down in the blue bar down there. So why would you use protein enzymes? Well, one of the things that a lot of people notice with Ondea Pro is that protein rest gives you a lot more head retention on your beers than you would otherwise. And that may have to do with what Mark was saying earlier about how some of our malts are a little less well modified because there's just not that body of expertise on how to malt rice and millet and these other grains the same way there is with barley, where people have been doing it for hundreds of thousands of years, right? So it's still more of a discovery process. And even to get where we are, it has taken some tremendously talented people to do that. I know Jim and Twyla are both extremely technically oriented and very talented maltsters, and the products that they make, it's not just as easy as throwing some grains in some warm water and then collecting it at the end of the day. So they put a lot of effort into making these malts as powerful as they can be, but it's just, we're in the very early days of discovering it. So definitely that Ondea Pro does help give you a little bit more of that activity that barley brewers might take for granted. But it's really easy to do with Ondea Pro. We can just put the enzymes in there, and thanks to the hard work of the people at Novozymes, so we can get pretty much the same result as you would with a well-modified barley malt, but with other kinds of grains. So, all right, there's a bit of a tangent, but so the protein enzymes does improve head retention. One thing I will say, it does also decrease body slightly. So there are times when I skip this step when I'm brewing. I don't always do the protein step, especially if I'm getting a lot of protein from some of the other grains that are in there in my recipe, and I want to make sure I get as much body as possible for like a nice thick stout or something like that. I might skip that protein rest and let the other grains contribute to the protein that we need for head retention there. So there's a bit of that trade-off there to think about when you're deciding if you want to use that step or not. Once we get up to the next step, this orange bar, this is normally where barley brewers would talk about the beta amylase rest. But the problem for us is that most of our grains are not gelatinized yet at that point. So any beta amylase that exists within the grains, it's not doing a whole lot at that point. And that's one of the big challenges with gluten-free brewing is how do we get fermentable sugars out of the grains? But there's still useful stuff going on at this step, even if there's not a lot of sugar being generated. You'll see on the right, I put a few little indicators, the degree of gelatinization for millet and rice there. So you can see in this orange bar, you're getting some, you're starting to get some activity from millet. Rice is really not giving you a whole lot at that point yet. So there is a little bit of sugar generation going on. But there's a lot of other useful activities. And for me, sort of figuring this out was key to getting the best results out of Ondea Pro in particular. Rice has a lot of fat. There's a lot of fat in the bran portion of a rice grain. So those fats are not necessarily going to do good things for your beer. And so it's useful to be in this orange zone so that the enzymes in Ondea Pro that break down fats, those can work at their ideal temperature. We also get some of that pilulinase, those starch debranching enzymes, that happens at that range. But I will say that honestly, I always expected pilulinase to make a huge difference in yield, but I never really saw much of an improvement based on not using it at all. Like when I was just using Thermomil and doing a cereal cooking and then bringing it back down and adding in that fungal enzyme in order to get maltose. I would get slightly less yield doing it that way, but it was not a huge amount. It was like, maybe 4 specific gravity points at the most. So that was not as big a thing for me. But definitely what is great about this at this temperature range is all those cell wall enzymes that Mark was talking about. Those are working really well there, and those are making it much easier to extract the wort. So whatever else you're doing in terms of the generating sugars and stuff, it doesn't help you any if those sugars get stuck in the mash tun, right? So having those cell wall enzymes there that break down all of that, it makes you get a very noticeable difference in the viscosity of your mash. It goes from being kind of porgy when you start to being fairly liquid by the end of that step. So that's one of the big advantages of doing something in the orange zone there. And then when you get up to the top, this is where the two enzymes do very different things here. So Ondea Pro, at the top range, if all you're using is Ondea Pro, you're going to get a lot of dextrins. It's not going to be a beer that is very fermentable. And the tests that I've done with only Ondea Pro, I end up with between 30 and 40% fermentability. So that's really low. Most people would not be happy with that degree of fermentability in their beers. Typical for standard styles of beers is somewhere between 65 and 80 for traditional barley-based beers. But you do still need some dextrins in your beer, obviously. So it is useful in terms of generating dextrins, but you can flip that over now to the Ceramix Flex side, and you see that at that temperature range, even if you're using something like rice that needs to be up at that temperature for gelatinization, Ceramix Flex is still working there and it's making maltose, the same as you would get from a beta amylase that's in barley. And you end up with a wort profile that's very close to what you get from a traditional barley wort profile in terms of the amount of maltose versus the other sugars in there. So by changing the dosage of your Ceramix Flex here, you can dial in the fermentability. And for me, at this point, I can do it very exactly, where I hit my starting and final gravities almost to the dot every single time. I'm, getting between 1 and 2 specific gravity points of starting and finishing gravity on every beer that I brew. I'm brewing every week with this stuff. So it is very predictable once you figure out your dosages, and that's going to be dependent a little bit on your particular brewing system. So you're going to have to experiment a little bit with that. But once you get it in there, you can brew confidently knowing that I want a beer that's 5% alcohol and it's got a medium body, and you're going to hit that every time. It's pretty easy to do that. So you can brew only with Ceramix Flex and leave out the Ondea Pro, especially if you're not concerned so much about the protein action. You're going to need to use a little bit more of it because it's going to be the only enzyme in there making any kind of starch conversion. Or you can do what I usually do, which is you mix them up. And I use the some of the lower temperature activities of Ondea Pro, and then I dose it so that when I get up to the higher temperatures, I get the mix of dextrins for body and mouthfeel and maltose for fermentability that we want for the beer. So it's pretty easy to do, and it's a very reliable process. And what I really like about these two enzymes, instead of something like Thermomil, which I was using a lot before, is they denature before the boiling point. So this is another kind of key thing, is that you want to be able to control when all this activity is going to stop too. So getting up towards 200 degrees, these enzymes are going to stop doing anything for you. So you can do things like do a kettle sour, which would be much harder to do with Thermomil, because Thermomil needs to be boiled for a good while before the activity kicks out. But these ones, as long as you get them up to the boiling point, you can be sure that there's no more enzymes going on there, and then you can chill your wort and you can add your bacteria, and you could do a kettle sour that way. So it's the huge temperature range is what makes these things really powerful, but also having that cutoff that's below the boiling point lets us really lock in the kind of sugars that we want from the mash. I guess the only other thing I'll say quickly about this slide here is I've seen some people talking about using really large doses of some of these enzymes to sort of try to get more activity out of a single enzyme. I found with Ondea Pro that doesn't really do much. If you're using a dosage within the recommended range that's published by the manufacturer, then you're going to get more or less all of the dextrins created as long as you let it sit there for an hour, the typical mash time frame. So you don't need to go overboard with adding extra Ondia Pro just in case. I haven't found that has any kind of benefit. So, save yourself a little bit of money and just use as much as the dosage is recommended, and you should be fine there. On the other hand, with Cermix Flex, I do find that the beer that you get out the other side is very sensitive to, I shouldn't say very sensitive, it is sensitive to the dosage. So if you're up on the high sides of the recommendation, you're going to get fermentability at 85% or higher, depending on your grain bill, which is going to be kind of thin-bodied for most beers, unless you're doing something like a really dry pilsner or like a brewed IPA or something like that. So that's the one where you're going to want to dial down the amount that you're using a little bit, so that you can land in that range that's a little bit more desirable for the styles. So so I guess the moral of that story is, go with the recommendations for the Ondia Pro and you'll be fine. If you want to play with Cermix Flex, start out a little bit shy in terms of how much enzyme you're adding in. It's always better to use a little bit less there, and then the next batch, if it wasn't quite enough, you can add a little bit more. All right, so with all of that, here are sort of 3 possible mass schedules that would work for gluten-free brewing for either millet or rice. And I just want to talk through them quickly here and tell you what you could expect with all of these. So quick and dirty at the top here, we're just going to use Cermix Flex, not worry about anything else. We're just going to sit at a single infusion mash. As you can see, that temperature is higher than you would use for barley, but that's because of our higher gelatinization temperatures. And Cermix Flex doesn't mind that at all. It's totally happy in that range. So you can leave your mash there and get lots of fermentable sugars out of that. So if you're doing an all millet-based beer, that's a perfectly acceptable mash schedule right there. You get you might not get every single last drop of sugar out of the millet, but you're going to get pretty good conversion, pretty good efficiency there with that mash schedule. With rice, it's not going to be as good because rice really does need to get a little bit hotter. You're still going to get a fair bit. You might get like 60 to 70% of the potential sugars out of the rice at that temperature, but you're not going to get everything out of it. For that, you're going to have to go a little bit hotter than that. So if you want to move beyond the sort of quick and dirty, you could do a 2-step mash here with Cermix Flex and optionally with Ondia Pro. This would work especially well with a millet-based beer that you want to be sort of medium bodied. That lower temperature rest is going to let you do all of those things with the cell walls and the fat breakdown enzymes and all that stuff. It's going to give you a bit of that polyolynase action to increase your yield by a little bit. And then when you raise that up to the higher temperature there, you're going to make sure that the millet is fully gelatinized and you get all the sugars out of that. And because you haven't been doing anything in the protein rest range, you're not going to do anything that reduces the body of your beer. So you'll get something that is fairly medium bodied. And if you've got enough grains in there that produce foam, natural foam, things like quinoa or buckwheat, then you'll also get some pretty good head retention on that beer too. And then the final one, if you wanted to go, all in, and this is actually a mass schedule that I use quite a lot for a lot of my beers, and it works for any type of grain you can imagine, and probably some of those other things like cassava that Mark was mentioning. I don't have any experience with those, but you start out low at the protein rest range. It's not very long; it's only about 15 minutes or so. Then you raise up the temperature so you can get the lipids and the cell walls and all that stuff working in there, get the polyolynase action. If you're using millet, you're going to get a bit of sugars being generated there. For rice, not so much, but then you go up finally for that high temperature rest in the mid 170s range, and that's going to gelatinize everything. You're going to get really great extraction yield out of that. And using this schedule, I can get yields that are almost as good as barley out of my grains. People have been talking about for a long time that gluten-free grains just have so much less sugar than barley and wheat, and it's not true. I can get, they say 2-row barley gets you 37 ppg of, potential extract points per pounds per gallon. What you actually end up with in the boil kettle is always lower because that's sort of a laboratory range. But I've been able to set my calculator for rice and millet at 35 ppg using this schedule here and hit my targets every time. So there's maybe a little bit less sugar in our malts, but there's not a whole lot less sugar. So using this kind of a multi-step process here with the right enzymes that's going to give you the potential to unlock the vast majority of what's within those grains. All right, so those are that's what I've got here. So I guess I'll open it up for any questions.
Hey, hey, Aaron. So, take us through maybe your thinking on a couple of pretty standard beer styles that we would see brewed out there. So say like a hoppy IPA with maybe a lighter body, and then maybe say a lager or something like that with like a more malty flavor profile. So using these enzymes and then maybe fitting them into these mash schedules and using these enzymes, how would you go about your thinking when it comes to differentiating your enzyme additions for those two styles?
Right. So for anything lighter bodied, I definitely make sure to use that protein rest down at the bottom, because that's gonna help with that. And as a side effect, it's going to give you more head retention, which is always a nice thing, right? And then you would want to also increase the amount of Ceramix Flex that you use, because that's going to give you more fermentability, which means the beer is going to dry out a little bit more. So I have a couple of different dosages that I use. I have one that gets me usually around 65%, 65 to 70, depending on the grain bill. And then I got one that gets me closer to 78 to 81. And I use that more for the light bodied ones. And that's just basically adding a little bit more of the Ceramix Flex. Then the opposite is just the reverse of that. You might do the medium bodied chart over there, skip the protein rest, use a little bit less Ceramix Flex, and you're going to end up with less fermentable sugars, more body in there, more of that sort of residual dextrin mouthfeel, a little bit more maltiness out of that.
If you were to do that second version, if you had the ability to up that second step from 165 to 175, would that be preferable if you're using more rice in your grain bill?
Yeah, definitely. If you were going to do that with rice, you would want that second step to be up in the 170s. That would be the one difference. Yeah.
And Aaron, when you're talking about a little bit more Ceramix Flex, is that still within the recommended dosages, or are you going up even a little bit beyond that?
No, I've actually found for me well, I don't know. Mark's colleague told me he updated some of the ranges that were on the website. But when I first started using Ceramix Selection, I tried the recommended dosages. I found that they were all too high for me. So of course, I'm using with Ondia Pro, so I'm getting some action there, generating dextrins for me too.
Right.
So for the so the medium-bodied one, I'd be using a fraction of the lower range, and then for the light-bodied one, I'd be using closer to the bottom range for the Ondia Pro, for the Ceramix Flex rather.
Do we know? Are there different? Sorry, go ahead. You go ahead.
Kind of back to what Kale was asking. So I'm doing a stout, and I want to hit about 8% ABV and about 10-20 when we're done with good body. And it sounds kind of like, you do one thing, you get good head. You do the other thing, you get good body. Where do you draw that balance line, and like which schedule would you recommend? Oh, I should add it's about half rice and half millet.
I mean, gluten-free stouts tend to be one of the more challenging styles. One thing that I have found that helps, this is separate from these particular enzymes, it's actually a different kind of enzyme, not by Novozymes, but there's there's the enzyme that has sort of a bad rap in the gluten-free brewing community for the gluten-reduced enzyme that people use. So that's not actually, it wasn't designed for reducing gluten initially. That was just sort of a byproduct of what it does. What it is it's a chill haze reducing enzyme. It gets rid of the chill haze.
Right.
I have found when you use that enzyme in your fermenter, and just to be really clear here, there's no gluten in this enzyme. It destroys.
Mm-hmm.
When you use this this enzyme in your fermenter, it breaks down some of those proteins of the chill haze size, and it improves head retention. So that might be one little secret that you can use if you want to use some Brewer's Clarex in there, or some I think Clarity Firm is the other name for it, depending on the brand. That if you're getting the body you want and the head retention is a little lackluster, you might consider giving that a shot.
Okay.
What about all of these mash schedules are, either a single infusion or rising, step mashes, and there's a number of ways to do that, right? With different, herms or rims or decoctions, I guess. But what about the reverse of that? The reverse steps that we've seen out a lot out there, whatever you want to call it, falling mashes. I know that even on a brewer scale, and talking to Bob and some other breweries, they don't even have an ability to do any rising. It's all falling, right? So how does a falling step mash fit into this in terms of what you get in the end product?
So I did falling step mashes before these enzymes were available, because it was the only way you could gelatinize your starch. It was basically cereal cooking, but doing everything in the same vessel, as opposed to having a separate cooker for that. For example, if you're going to use those older enzymes like Termamil with fungamyl, then you're going to have to cook it first with Termamil, drop the temperature, then add the fungamyl, because if you put it in the fungamyl at the high temperature, it's going to instantly denature because it's too hot for it. So if you were, as a theoretical thing, if you were to do a reverse step mash with these enzymes, I wouldn't do it with Ondia Pro, because you're going to lose all the lower temperature enzymes right away. They're not going to have any activity, and so it's just kind of an expensive waste of enzymes, basically. With Ceramix Flex, you'll be okay. You'll still get that maltogenic high temperature enzyme. You could do a single infusion up in the 170s if you wanted with rice. And hopefully, as your temperature was falling, if you don't have temperature control in your mash tun, as the temperature is falling, hopefully you'll get enough gelatinization going on of that rice so that the Ceramix Flex will be able to do its thing and finish converting all of it into sugar. So that would be sort of, if you took the first chart and you bumped it up another 10 degrees and you put in your Ceramix Flex and you just try to keep that as insulated as possible and waited an hour and a half, that would be a reasonable option to do as well. It's just, it depends if you can hold that temperature or not. The higher the temperature goes, the faster it's going to drop, and the harder it is to hold it steady. So it's definitely easier if you can heat your mash tun and raise the temperature.
Any other? I could keep asking questions. Anyone else have some questions?
Pretty basic one, but do you find what ratio of water to grain do you find works best for the Ceramix and the Ondia Pro? I still not to dilute it down and get best activity as far as your water levels are concerned.
Yeah, I haven't found an issue really with diluting the enzymes with water levels, but I have had issues with the thickness of the mash. These grains we use seem to need a little bit more water than barley does. So I'm usually going at a ratio of around 3:1, or 1.5 quarts per pound, I believe. So that's sort of in the upper side of a normal mash thickness, if you want to think of it in that sense, and that gives me enough liquid in there that it doesn't get stuck up, and the enzymes have no trouble working here. One thing I wanted to mention quickly here that had come up in the pre-discussion, we didn't get around to it, but I thought it was a great point that Kale made, and I want to make sure we touch on that, is Kale was talking about how some, there are definitely brewers outside of the US who don't have access to all of these malted gluten-free grains. So one of the other great things about Ondia Pro is that you can use it according to its original function, which was to work with unmalted grain. So you could get, for example, some brown rice. If you didn't have access to malted rice, you could get some brown rice and some rice hulls, and just burn the brown rice through your mill to break it open, and mix that up with the rice hulls in your mash tun and do the Ondia Pro step mash there, and you could get yourself wort that was pretty similar to like a pale rice malt. So that might be another application of these enzymes for brewers who don't have access to some of these gluten-free malts, as you can try experimenting with some
I was gonna ask about this, so thanks for
yeah,
bringing this up. But
yeah.
actually, I think I'm the right one to chip in here. So, problem is that although I'm in Europe, I don't have access to the Novozymes enzymes either. The problem is they sell it in large quantities for breweries. So like I've contacted my reseller in the country, and they said the smallest amount they sell would be like 30 liters.
Mm-hmm.
So
You
that's
just need to
quite
brew more beer, Peter.
Yeah, actually,
Yeah.
Brian from Gluten Free Homebrewing was very helpful, and I'm thinking of getting in touch with him and getting some to try them at least. I've never brewed with these enzymes, and
Yeah.
actually, yeah, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I think that's a great idea. And if you can find someone who's willing to, so, there might be another, Novozymes is a Danish company, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
So definitely these enzymes exist in Europe. So
Right.
if you can find another brewery that's using them and is willing to sell you a small quantity, that might be one way to get hold of it.
Yeah,
I guess
thanks.
that
And
goes
that's
to
a good
another
idea.
question: is storage of enzymes, if you do have to get a bigger quantity, is there a certain temperature or requirement for storage so they stay active longer?
They like refrigerator temperature, from what I've read on the label. I've had some of them around for better part of a year and no difference in activity. Mark, do you have any information on whether the activity decreases over time for these enzymes?
Yeah, they will lose. It's a slow degradation in activity. And one thing I've had some people ask me if they could aliquot it out into smaller bottles and then freeze it. And technically it should be feasible and shouldn't cause any issues there. So if you do get a larger quantity of it, I would say definitely freeze it at 20 below or colder, and you shouldn't have any issue there. I think when it's the thaw, freeze, thaw back and forth, then you get kind of a shear effect that can drop activity much faster. Um, but yeah, and in this project we're currently running in the U.S. on being able to sell smaller samples of these enzymes here. I'm hoping, there have been talks. I'm not 100% sure, but this could be more of a global initiative as well. So maybe that'll help out you guys there in the UK and these other countries that can't get it because it is larger volume sizes there.
Sounds good.
I think Aaron, you had it on your chart, but I just want to clarify the denaturing temperature of Ondia Pro Cermex Flex. Is that top range 190 that you have on this this chart, or is it higher than that?
I believe it's higher than that. Those are just sort of the ranges where they work their best, if I'm understanding correctly.
Yeah,
While
I think
we're
they're
on
around
that,
200.
I was wondering where that denaturing's temperature is, because I might have to do a decoction to do the rising step. I'm brewing with someone else on their system. So I want to be sure that we don't. I mean, I guess with a decoction, you're not heating the entire wort up, but
you should be getting close to that denaturing temp around 190. It should,
okay.
And a lot of these activities have already denatured pretty much, especially in the Ondea Pro. But as far as the Ceramix Flex, that one is probably going to be closer to the 190 there for it to fully denature, and it take a little bit of time for it as well. This is one reason why too we always say to use these enzymes on the hot side, because once they go through the boil, it denatures everything. You don't have any downstream impacts. So
Right. Yeah, you don't want your beer going down to 0.9.
Right.
Well, so
Well,
some of
Bri-
the some of the issues you may see in like post boil and fermentation, you'll see some people are not hitting their desired targets, so they'll pitch in like glucoamylase or something like that to kind of help dry the beer out more. The downside to that is the reason why I don't recommend it is um, uh, pretty much you pour that glass of beer, whether it's filtered or unfiltered. Let's say you remove all the yeast out of that beer. Well, there's enzyme activity that's still there, and as long as there's dextrins is there, and as that beer starts to warm up some, it can become sweeter with the enzyme present there. If yeast is still present as it warms up, it could take back the fermentation. In the packaging, it could, like if you're going out to distribute or something and it starts to warm up, it could ferment. So you have a variation in different in your different products. So
Yeah.
yeah, I found that out the hard way in some earlier batches. I put some fungamyl into the fermenter, and I thought, well, it's gonna stop when it runs out of the stuff that I can chew on, and I thought it was done, and it was sitting there in a keg for a month, and then after that it was extremely sweet, and it was very thin body because it had just very, very slowly in the at refrigerator temperatures continued to chew on those remaining dextrins.
Wow.
yes, and
I was
another.
going to mention the
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Someone was asking about the storage life on the enzymes, and the expiration dates on mine are quite far out. I forget exactly. It's like 2021, 2022. So I think they have a pretty long shelf life.
Yes, they formulate these enzymes to last, and it's typically they do it so there's a little more in there as well. So if you do lose any activity or whatnot, then it's pretty much still what the target says it is. So that's how you can meet that best by date. And even some of them, even past the best by date, they're still we see really good results from them. So.
Yeah, they do seem to stay active for a long time. I sell chemicals that contain Novozyme enzymes, and if you have a jug of it sitting around for 2 years, it actually becomes quite thick because it's actively working the whole time it's sitting in that jug. So it does seem to last quite a while.
Oh yeah, yeah. The one thing I'll point out too, and Aaron touched base on it a little bit here, as far as like some of these mashing profiles. In the gluten-free grains, I've noticed that some of these grains they don't have like beta glucans, and also some of these activities in the Andea Pro is not necessary, and so definitely I agree with what he has said about using just solely ceramics flex. So that's going to take a little bit of playing around, trying to learn what these grains have, and I'm working to try to get more of a chart created to where you can kind of see what activities in this enzyme and what that activity kind of goes after in the actual grain itself. And because some of these enzymes can be expensive, and like Aaron had mentioned there, like Andea Pro, if you're dosing it in too hot, you'll lose out a lot of those lower activities, and it is an expensive enzyme. So it's kind of a learning process to kind of figure out what it is you're using in these brews, as well as these activities. Are they necessary or whatnot? So.
Mark, that's an interesting question. Is there any chance that we'd see some enzymes that are maybe a little more specific to the gluten-free brewing world over time? Like some of these, even just something that's more focused on this combination that we're trying to get out of Andea Pro and Ceramics Flex. Apollolinase, for instance, and some of the higher temperature alpha amylase.
Yeah, that's a really good question, Stuart, because since this project, I've realized how many gluten-free breweries there are out there and the interest of it. And I'm would like to say I'm pushing for it. So, and I think it'd be great to be able to have a product dedicated solely for gluten-free brewing. So that is something I have brought up. So maybe I can't guarantee it, but maybe that is something that'd be beneficial to the industry.
Yeah, that's great to hear.
Yeah,
that's great. Let us know.
We're used to things being really, really, really expensive, Mark. So don't worry about that part.
And really, really, really difficult.
Yeah.
Club's motto.
So I do think,
what's our club slogan? 4 times as expensive, 3 times as difficult. Something
I do think we're sort of at the cusp of with gluten-free beer, and this is sort of me personally where my interest comes in this, because I'm not a celiac. I can eat gluten. I got interested in this because I have lots of family members with gluten issues, and I wanted to brew for them. And when I started brewing these beers, I said, heck, these are pretty good. And I was ready for a career change and wanting to open up a brewery, but there's so many breweries out there. It's very competitive. I wasn't sure if I wanted to just be one of the dozens of other breweries in San Francisco. And it was like, but when I found out there were no other gluten-free breweries in the Bay Area, there's now another one opened up since, but I was like, well, there's definitely some potential there because these beers taste good. I give these beers to other professional brewers and they can't tell they're gluten-free. So, there's a lot of potential here because there's a lot of people who can't have gluten, or even people who can but choose to avoid gluten. So I think we're at this sort of critical mass where we've got some really good quality ingredients out there. We've got the enzymes, and we need to convert them, and we're going to see this thing really take off. And I think as that happens, the business case for a company like Novozymes to produce stuff specifically for us is going to get a lot more appealing there too.
Yep, I totally agree. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Mark. We're getting a little bit over our scheduled hour time. So, is there any other questions for Mark or Aaron before we call it a day?
Yeah, Aaron. So, are you pretty much done with other enzymes like Termamil?
Yeah, for now, I haven't used anything other than these two. In about 6 months now, I guess. I haven't found the need for any of the others.
So if you've got those, just throw them in the garbage. Don't use them. I'm just kidding.
Or send them to Europe.
Yeah.
Send them to Europe. Send them to Peter.
Thanks. I'll send you my address.
Anyone else? Any last questions? I think this is probably a good stopping point. So thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
Mark and Aaron for doing this. Again, it's fantastic stuff. As usual, this is going to get posted to YouTube. I'll put the link into our group. And if you haven't subscribed to the YouTube, there's a little plug for the YouTube channel. If you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel, please do that. And then you get all of the video links as soon as they get posted. So other than that, everybody enjoy the rest of your, almost ending weekend, and we'll see you next month. Take care.
Too fast. Thanks.
Thanks, y'all. Cheers. Have a good one.